Great. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here, for being interested in mental health and this program that we'll be talking about, Mental Health First Aid. I'm Celeste. I am working as an AmeriCorps service member for this year, and part of that has been that I get to teach this awesome course called Mental Health First Aid. So before we get into it, I want to briefly thank Earth Space for this amazing opportunity and Conscious Growth for putting on this speaker series and inviting me to join you all. It's such an honor. I also want to do a brief land acknowledgement. I feel that it's the least I could do while we are in this space, sharing this space and sharing information and growing together. So the people of Multnomah, Chinook, Tualatin, the tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Cowlitz and many others who come before us, thank you. Thank you. I want to acknowledge and honor their stewardship and also bring in a sense that maybe we find a deeper respect and connection to these tribes and these lands. So who has taken a CPR course? Those of you who are in the space? Yeah, okay, so there are a lot of folks who have taken CPR courses, and they're really important for offering first aid to somebody in crisis. And we need people scattered throughout society to respond to save lives. And Mental Health First Aid is a program similarly geared toward crisis scenarios, but what I love about it is it also helps for early response. So if you are in a situation where you just notice somebody's maybe feeling a little bit anxious for a period of time, or if you're noticing signs and symptoms where maybe someone is suddenly acting differently at work, at home, or maybe at your local cafe, you're going to be tooled up through this program to have that conversation with them in a way that is helpful, in a way that is non-judgmental, and in a way that allows them to start the process of recovering their sense of self, really, for lack of a better word. I want mental health first aid to be as widespread as CPR because it increases our community's overall resilience. When we can show up for each other, we're not therapists, we're not doctors, but we can still show up for each other. And this is the kind of training to help us do that kind of grassroots effort. So I've used mental health first aid in a lot of different ways, and so have people who have done the training. So we call them mental health first aiders. So when you become a mental health first aider, I host something called the Roundtable Discussions. So once a month we get together and we talk about how we're using this tool in our real lives. And it's really powerful, and I want to bring it up now, but I want to mention it now because I'll refer back to it a couple times throughout the presentation. And each time we talk about mental health, today or tomorrow, or if you become a mental health first aider in the grocery stores, in your offices, we're reducing stigma, right, which is a huge issue with mental health. And we're increasing the likelihood of folks receiving support and recovering their mental health. And so I want to ask the question, how comfortable are you talking to somebody about mental health? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, I don't know anything, I don't even know where to begin, I won't say a word, to 10 being, I'm a pro. What would you say?
5.
Right in the middle, 5.
Probably about 7.
Yeah, I'd say like 6 to 8 kind of range.
7, 5, 6 to 8. A 6. Do you have some reason for why that is? Is it because, I'll let you answer. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
I would say I fall on 6 to 8 because studying psychology and working in social work fields and trauma-based care and trauma-informed care has given me the tools to be able to talk about it more and help me feel more comfortable talking about it. So I think but I still think that it could even be better.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I feel even when we are tooled up, in some ways, we still might rate ourselves as a 6 some days because we're we're not geared up for that. So one thing about mental health first aid, in the program we talk about, choosing the time. If now isn't the time for you because you're tired or because you got your own kind of situation you're dealing with, maybe it's not the time to perform mental health first aid. And maybe other days you're like an 8, you're a solid 8 or 9. A lot of us, we aren't raised in a society that talks about mental health. That's, I feel, our job, our generation's job. Like, we're really bringing it up to the forefront. So I'm excited to share a little bit more about mental health first aid so that maybe we can get up to like a solid 8 after either today's talk, or if you decide to do the longer training, right? You can really become more confident. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes here. So something that I wrote is kind of interlacing where we are, right, where we've been. So we've been in a pandemic for 2 years. The stressors in our lives are new, they're different, they're things that we haven't ever dealt with before, and I have a feeling that beyond this 2-year period, we're going to have fallout. So these kinds of trainings are really important for us to be able to continue to show up for ourselves and other people in these times ahead, when we're dealing with integrating what has happened over the last couple of years. So let's go to the next slide, and let's look at this statistic. So it takes an average of 10 years for somebody to get help. So if you're suffering from a mental health challenge, if you have you ever before, actually? I certainly have, and I have found it so challenging to navigate getting the support that I wanted or needed. And it would take months to just have a yes, I can see you in 3 months. So it makes sense why this number is here. And I bring it up because we as mental health first aiders can be a part of changing that 10 years into maybe 10 months for someone, or 10 weeks, maybe even 10 days. I have a resource guide that I'll be sharing in a little bit. And we as mental health first aiders, or as community members, can help those struggling with mental health or substance use challenges by connecting them with some of those resources. So mental health first aid is best used as an early intervention program, although we'll see it can also be used in crisis situations. There are 5 steps in the mental health first aid action plan. We're going to look at those in just a minute. And one of those steps is to encourage professional help when appropriate, right? So let's take a look at the anatomy of the mental health first aid action plan. This is a little bit of a busy slide. We've got our mascot Algie down here. Algie is a koala because this program originated in Australia. So he is our happy reminder of the action plan. So you'll see on the left that this is like a wheel, right? So this is a nonlinear action plan. So you might walk into a scenario where all you're doing is giving reassurance and information. You might walk into a scenario and you're using all 5 of the steps. At the center, you'll see that the word assess is kind of at the center of the wheel. This is a reminder to consistently assess for safety in different situations, your personal safety, the safety of those around, and also to assess for signs and symptoms of a crisis. If there's a crisis, we respond differently. First, we would find emergency support team, whatever that looks like for you in your kind of comfort level. And if it is a crisis, we make that call and then we go through the steps. If it's not a crisis, we look at the steps. So first we'll look at this approaching thoughtfully. In the training we look at how people might approach not so thoughtfully, and as well as what is helpful. And the reason we do that is because, again, not every day is our bright shiny day. Some days we're going to approach a situation and maybe screw it up a little bit. And we have to give ourselves grace and trust that we're going to continue to try to do it better and better each time. The next step is to listen non-judgmentally. Do you all have any examples of what listening non-judgmentally might look like or sound like?
Nodding.
Yeah, that's a nonverbal gesture, definitely. Nodding is important.
It's giving encouragement to continue.
Yeah, maybe like a or tell me more.
Eye
Yeah.
contact.
Eye contact, yes. Something that we teach in the training is, in some cultures, eye contact can be activating, maybe slightly inappropriate, right? So we want to look at those kinds of situations as well. How can I become more culturally, how can I have more cultural context here? That way people feel comfortable. And maybe we're not the person to provide this individual with support, but maybe we connect them with that support if it feels like we're just not the right match. So another piece of listening non-judgmentally is just silence, giving the person space to speak. It can be really challenging to open up about something that you've held so strongly down and tried to continue, for those 10 years or 10 days dealing with your mental health challenge. So it can take a while to unpack it. So our ability to be silent, to stay present, is helpful in this step of non-judgmental listening. The next step is giving reassurance and information, and my co-instructor, she likes to call this the destigmatizing step. So we give reassurance. Hey, you're not alone. This is normal after a traumatic event or after this happened, and then we give information. It's common for people to take years to work with this, and are you interested in having support throughout this? What's the best way for you to feel safe talking about this, right? So we can sort of play around with these different steps together. But this is a really important step, giving reassurance and information. As mental health first aiders, we also are in a position to encourage appropriate professional help, and then encouraging self-help as well. So somebody like me, I struggle with seasonal depression. Okay, what can I do for myself to encourage my mental health, right? So go on hikes, go to the coast, spend time with animals, do yoga, right? That's for me, and I read books. Maybe you guys have some things that you do for yourself as well. And I notice when I'm speaking to others about self-help, if they ask for support and information about self-help, they're happy to receive it. But oftentimes if they're not asking for it, we don't want to just push it on them, like, oh, you should try this. Sometimes we want to allow the person to find their own way. Same with encouraging professional help. Maybe we ask the question, have you seen somebody about this? Are you interested in seeing somebody about this? It sounds like you could benefit a lot from speaking to somebody who does this every day. It's their job to work with people who are struggling with psychosis or different substance use challenges. I want to be here as your friend and as your, as a mental health first aider, I can provide support. But I would highly encourage you talk to X. And again, I'll have those resource guides for you so that you're tooled up with that kind of information. Okay. So that was the LG action plan. Let's look a little bit at how mental health first aid can be helpful. If you're noticing early or worsening signs and symptoms, maybe somebody's appearance is changing, maybe they're kind of not able to take care of their daily to-dos as well as they once did. Those are kind of some things that you might notice and start a conversation, right? So you can be their trusted go-to when they're ready for more resources or the next steps. In the roundtable, we hear stories about students talking to their peers about stress and suicide. And we hear at work people talking about how they're using their non-judgmental listening skills, because that can be an area in our lives where we feel like maybe there would be judgment. So we're really working to slowly change culture and change the stigma around mental health. I've used mental health first aid in grocery stores, talking to different people about postpartum depression or just general feelings of overwhelm, right? And I find so much joy in having these conversations because it's a part of destigmatizing mental health. And also, it feels good to give reassurance and information in different contexts. Mental health first aid, one of the main things we teach is that recovery is always possible. So we want to look at how a person is appearing, the signs and symptoms. Is it early worsening? We can work with people to get help early, and shorten the recovery process. We can also, as mental health first aiders, recognize and respond in a crisis, such as an injury or overdose or imminent harm. And these are times where we want to have practice, kind of like CPR. You do your compression so that when you're out in the world, something happens, you maybe have that muscle memory. So I'd like to do an exercise in just a moment where we do those kind of compressions. We're going to talk about how to have a conversation about suicide. And so if suicide is a topic for you that feels triggering or overwhelming, please feel free to step out, or to, if you're watching the video, mute, right? And we'll get to the resource slide after the suicide slide. So I just want to take a moment while we're here. I found some cool statistics. In 2016, young adults under 26 who needed treatment for substance use, only 7.7% received any support or help. Adults over 26, 12% received it, so there was a little bit more support for adults that are older. But I just thought that was interesting for us who were maybe mental health first aiders or just concerned community members. How can we get more people the help that they need, right? So by starting these conversations and, of course, destigmatizing help, Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to practice asking about suicide. Has anybody done something like this before? Okay. So I want you to notice how you feel. We're going to say it out loud together. We'll say each one twice. So we'll start with number 1. Are you thinking about killing yourself? And we'll do it again with a little more fluidity. Feel it in your body and in your voice. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Okay. And then number 2. Are you thinking about suicide? And we'll do it again. Say it in your voice, right? Are you thinking about suicide? Great. Okay, so we ask these two first questions just to get a sense, because somebody might say no, and then we say, okay, well, I'm here for you if you want to chat. It sounded like when you said this or this piece of art that you made, I want to understand what's going on. If you're not thinking about suicide, that's perfect. But if you are, we ask these next questions. Have you thought about how you would kill yourself? So we'll say that one together. Have you thought about how you would kill yourself? Yeah. And then we also ask this fourth one. Have you made any plans to prepare for suicide? So we'll say that together. Have you made any plans to prepare for suicide? And so it's really common for like the myth of asking about suicide. Let's see. So there's a common myth about asking about suicide where we think we might put the idea into somebody's head if we talk about it directly, or we think that if we talk about it, they're going to be more likely to do it. And this isn't the case. Research shows that people generally already know about suicide. I don't know about y'all, but I remember thinking about the concept when I was about 10 for the first time, and just considering, what is this? And that's pretty young. Like, people are certainly considering these topics. And if we bring it up, if we ask the question and we're sincere, maybe we're in a private space so that they feel like they can open up, then people are going to feel like they're heard. people might feel like they finally found somebody who cares. Mental health first aiders, we prepare to have these delicate conversations. So in the training, we ask these questions. We also go through scenarios where we're working with people using the Algae Action Plan to provide support and thoughtfully engage with a person. Not ever wanting to change the person necessarily, always giving them, a sense that they're being heard, they're being understood, and cared for. I want to acknowledge that those questions can be pretty challenging. I wrote in my notes, like a muscle, we start out a little bit awkward, but as we develop the muscle, it becomes more smooth, it becomes easier. And so I encourage you to consider practicing ways that you might say what you need to say. So if there's somebody in your community that struggles with a certain disorder, or maybe that is exhibiting signs and symptoms of mental health or substance use challenges, you can actually call like somebody at NAMI here or SAMHSA and have a conversation with someone, or look on their blog, right? So if you call them up and say, hey, I have a friend that's struggling with this, what is the best kind of conversation for me to have? They'll coach you through, which I think is a really powerful tool. We have these helpful resources. These are just several that I picked out of the larger resource guide. Lines for Life is specifically a suicide hotline. Have y'all heard of that before? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I thought it would be neat if we just take some time and actually pull out our phones, if you have it on you, and pop these numbers into your phone. That way, if you're ever in a situation and you need to make a call, you're ready. So Lines for Life is 800-923-4357. If you come across someone and you ask those questions, and you get the answer yes, you can call Lines for Life, right? Because that would be considered a crisis moment. If they say no, you might ask, okay, would you be interested in learning some more about how you can get some support? Or you might, when you're away from the person, you might call that line yourself again and ask, hey, I have somebody that I think could be considering suicide. What's the best way for me to move forward? I put this number here, 988. It's like 911, but for mental health crises. It's starting in July. So that's going to be a great resource. It's a national program. If you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend looking into it. The next one here is Portland specific. I think it's Multnomah County specific. It's called Project Respond. So if you come across somebody in a crisis situation, mental health crisis, you can call this number. And if you want, you can pop that into your phone as well. That's 503-988-4888. And I've done a little bit of research about this Project Response team, and it sounds like there has been statewide funding, so there will be response teams in counties across Oregon. It's been super successful, especially with responding specifically to mental health crises, because as we have seen, 911 is not always the best option whenever we're dealing with mental health crises. I added it here because it is our national crisis line, and I think it's a valuable place maybe to keep putting pressure to keep doing better. You can, if you do ever have to call 911 in a crisis situation, you can ask for a mental health trained response team. I also recommend letting them know this person is in crisis, they're having maybe a substance use challenge, or maybe it's mental health. Describe what's going on a little bit so that they show up a little bit more mentally prepared for what they're walking into. NAMI is a wonderful national organization, has a great website. SAMHSA, same thing. And the other day I was looking on the SAMHSA website and I noticed they have a great resource for naloxone training. Have y'all heard of naloxone before? Yeah, no. Naloxone is used in the case of an opioid overdose. So something in the training, in the mental health training that we say is if you know someone that has an opioid addiction or struggles with opioid use, and you're in close proximity with this person or these people, it might be smart to get naloxone training and have naloxone on you. What happens if a person overdoses on opioids, you can administer naloxone, and it gives them 30 minutes for an emergency team to come and do what they need to do to save the person's life. So it keeps them alive for 30 minutes. Essentially, naloxone fills receptors in their brain so that opioid can't go in. Really cool stuff. In the mental health first aid training, we have segments with videos, and one of the videos we see it administered, and it's so powerful, super moving to see. I also added this last line for the mental health first aid resource list. I checked that website out one day, and honestly, it was a lot of information. It was a little bit overwhelming for me, but it could be a great place to go if you have somebody in your life specifically, again, that maybe struggles with psychosis or struggles with panic disorder, eating disorder, right? We can look at this website and dig in and find the resources that we need for that person and become a more valuable, helpful resource for that person. What's up?
I can wait too.
Go for it.
You prefer that. I'm wondering, like, if you're out in public, if you're like on the bus or kind of like connecting with the community and you're noticing someone maybe having a mental health crisis, maybe how would you intervene with connecting an individual or like calling for help for that person if you're concerned about what's going on?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I'll walk through that. So the first step in the action plan is to assess, right? So if I'm going to approach this person, which is the next step, if I'm going to approach this person, am I going to be safe? Is this person safe? Do I feel okay with this? If not, maybe you find somebody else that might have training, right? Or you might, if it seems like a crisis, you might go ahead and make a call, let them know where you're at. I would say maybe project respond if you're on the bus in Portland.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. And if you do approach a person, say, we'll kind of tease this out a little bit.
Yeah.
So if you do approach a person, are you okay? Is there anything that you need right now? If they exhibit aggressive behaviors, maybe step back. In the training, we talk about how aggressive behaviors are not considered violence, right? We can unpack that at a different time. But essentially, if they feel aggravated and you still feel safe, like maybe they're fearful and you can see that, and maybe they'll calm down, then maybe you step back, create some space, and ask again, is there anything that you need right now? Are you okay? If they say, no, I'm not okay, then we call for emergency teams. If they say, yes, I'm okay, we listen to what's going on. Honestly, I don't know if you've ever been in a state, I guess, like a mental health kind of moment, but just having somebody ask, are you okay? Sitting and listening to me, and continuing to ask, like, what do you mean by that? Or is there anything else I can do for you? That just breaks away so much of the panic or the fear or whatever is rising up in that moment, and can be the difference for that person's day or week or month. Oftentimes when I've heard people in the mental health first aid roundtables talking about using mental health first aid, they're having those kinds of conversations. Just, how are you? How are you?
And if you're like not able to have the time to dedicate to diving into that conversation, you can kind of connect them with this hotline that will kind of take over if they're like, yeah, I would like some resources. I am struggling.
Exactly. Yeah. So if somebody says, if you say, would you like to be connected to a resource, and they say yes, then here's a number, call this number. You can even text a number. I have that number on the handout. So they can have a text conversation if they don't want to talk. Yeah, and if somebody says no, I wanted to touch on this, so I'm glad it's coming up now. If somebody ever says no, I don't want any help, we kindly say, okay, and if they're in our community, we'll say, okay, I'm here for you if you ever do want to talk, when you're ready. If we're encouraging professional help, and they're sort of like, no, I don't need that, then you can say, okay, that's great. I'm here for you as long as you need me, and when you're ready, let me know, and I'm happy to get those resources for you. We never want to force a person through the process, right? We always want to give them the time and their autonomy to move through their process when they're ready. Okay, y'all, so I'm going to hand out these helpful resource guides, along with some information about upcoming mental health first aid trainings.
Awesome.
Yeah, so this is my last slide, and I have these upcoming trainings happening in March, April, May, and June. These are facilitated by Oregon AHEC, Area Health and Education Centers. So if anybody wants to join one of these trainings to actually go through the process of doing these scenarios, learning more details about how this works, I'm happy to enroll you in any of these trainings at no cost. If you have a group that you would like to do a training, we have groups of 5 to 15 that we can facilitate, and those would be paid, each seat would be paid to the National Council, who puts on mental health first aid. Yeah, so thank you all so much. Do you all have any questions before we wrap up?
I have a question.
What's up?
So say you approach someone who's kind of having a panic attack and they're like hyperventilating, and you ask if they are okay and they need help, and they can't really respond because they are just like breathing really heavily. Would you then just kind of walk away because you didn't get a response, or would you maybe do like some breath exercises, like, okay, let's start like doing deep breaths or count to 10 or something like that?
Yeah, so with the mental health first aid hat, right, we are looking at that from the perspective of, is this a crisis or not? And according to the material, that would be considered a crisis, especially if the person's non-responsive. If the person's having a panic attack and you say, are you okay? And they can't answer, and maybe you would stick around, maybe you continue to see if they'll calm down in your presence, maybe. And maybe let them know. You can nod your head and let me know, are you okay? Has this happened to you before? What worked in the past? Sometimes people have had this happen before and they know that they'll be okay soon. They'll just be in their moment. And it can be helpful to have that support, maybe sitting them down so that they feel like they can rest. If somebody isn't having a panic attack and they aren't okay, of course, we would want to call an emergency response team. If they haven't had this happen before, again, probably a good idea to call for emergency support. Something that we talk about in the training is that anxiety attacks can have similar signs and symptoms as a heart attack. So if a person has never had this happen before, they don't know what's happening, probably a good idea to call for emergency support just in case. Yeah, good question. Very good question. Yeah, have y'all been in a situation where you needed to have a conversation about mental health or support somebody through a crisis, or maybe not even a crisis, just a general? Yeah, I'm getting a lot of head nods. Yeah, it's so common. It's so common. Yeah, so this training really tools you up to have those conversations. And what I'm loving the most is these monthly roundtable discussions after the training. We get people together, and we had a student last month who came in and said, I had a peer of mine say something about suicide, and I asked them, are you thinking about suicide? And they said yes, and I had the wherewithal to have that conversation. And we kind of unpacked it, we debriefed a little bit, and as a group, we're only mental health first aiders, right? So there's only so much that we're really in the scope of doing and saying. But we can still give that person who provided mental health first aid support. So remember in the 5 steps, there was this step of self-care. So that goes for offering to other people, but also for ourselves. So whenever we provide support for others through mental health or substance use challenges, it can be exhausting. Yeah, especially if we're dealing with our own stuff, if we are, living our own lives and balancing our own mental health. So it's helpful to have people that you can go to that are safe, that you can debrief with, that you feel will be always confidential and respectful, non-judgmental. So self-care as a mental health first aider is a big component of this. Any other questions?
I think just a kind of a comment, I think a big one for me is just sort of getting out of my own way. I know like when I see situations, especially with loved ones, and kind of feeling like, okay, well, I don't quite have my house in order, so, you know, how do I have ground to identify issues that others might be dealing with? So I think that's just a big one, and I think the practice, like you said, just kind of having those practice of the compressions, of being able to kind of identify, okay, this is something that isn't a judgmental action and more so of, hey, I'm just here to help.
Yeah, I'm here to help if you want it.
If you want it, right?
Yeah, so we open up the conversation, and the conversation might not unfold all the way today, but maybe the next time we see the person, they're ready, or maybe next year, they've been thinking, wow, man, you were so non-judgmental, and you gave me a safe place to be, and I'm ready to have that conversation now. So it can really make a difference in people's lives to have people scattered throughout who are paying attention, right? The week after I finished my training, I went to the grocery store and had that conversation with a woman about postpartum depression, and felt so good to be able just to have the openness to normalize and destigmatize what so many individuals deal with on a daily basis. So it's completely, it's very practical, and which I love. It's also very nuanced, right? Each situation is going to be different, whether we're talking to our family members or our friends, our coworkers, students. We're going to have a different dynamic that we always want to be checking in with. If there's that assessment again, kind of taking the temperature, making sure that the conversation feels helpful, feels like it's moving in a way that is supportive of the other person. One of the metaphors we share in class, specifically around the conversation of suicide, but in general when we're talking about providing support for others, this metaphor is like a duck in a pond. So underneath the water, the duck's little feet are like going crazy, right? And above the water, it just looks so serene. And as mental health first aiders, we want to keep that cool, calm, collected above the water, even if inside we're having a paddle. And there comes that, again, the importance of self-care and debriefing afterward, because there are people out there who maybe have been suffering for years and years, and just to have somebody seem non-judgmental and listen is such a relief, and can be the difference in sometimes life or death, you know. So it's really, really great work. Thank you all for your interest. Thank you for participating, for being here with me.
Thank you.